welcome to the actual week 6 of the story.
I'm a pastor. I like math. Yeah.
Where he looked at the father's blessing. Isaac, who's Abraham's son, blesses his son Jacob, steals the birthright. Incredible story about a broken, dysfunctional family.
Can I ask you one question before we get into it?
One and one.
Why aren't you wearing a black shirt today?
I could tell you right now, but I think I'd rather tell you at the end of this video.
Very good.
Yeah.
Nicely done. We better remember to say at the end of this video.
I got a lot of viewer mail last week.
A lot of viewer hatred.
Yeah.
The great mysteries. Anyway, where we were talking about Jacob, right? Big story.
Big story. And if you were in Bible study, you heard us spend some time talking about God's grace for broken people and God's plan through broken people second.
Yeah. So I wasn't in class the whole time, but I know from our previous conversations you were talking about the amount of grace that we see here in the story of Jacob and Esau and his father Isaac. Talk to me a little bit more, share a little bit more about the grace, amazing grace that we see here.
In order to understand the grace, we have to understand the full extent of the brokenness. So typically we read the story and we think it's Jacob, the younger brother, and mother Rebecca get together, and they're the bad guys, and they trick Isaac, the father, and but really the blame is multifaceted on all 4 members of the family. So one of the things that we find when we take a closer look at the text is that Esau, Hebrews 12 actually tells us that he's profane, godless, that he's willing to sacrifice obedience for immediate gratification when he sells the birthright. A couple chapters earlier.
For stew, right?
Yeah.
It's always with the stomach, with him and his dad, I guess, a little bit. But yeah.
And that's our story too.
Yeah.
I mean, trading immediate pleasure, immediate gratification for obedience, and I know we should be good, but really not doing what we should do.
Okay, that's Esau.
Isaac, the dad, he lets Esau marry outside the family. It was a big no-no. It's essentially passive. He's doting on his father. There's a kind of a throwaway line right before the story that says Isaac loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Probably favoritism in the family. Probably part of what drove them apart. In your own family, how broken things can get if one parent's not treating the other kids the same as one, things like that. So full extent of the brokenness. But yet one commentator says that Jacob, who is sort of the tragic hero of this story, even though he's the villain in the way he's portrayed, he's the prototype in the book of the Genesis, in fact, the Old Testament, the one example of all examples of God's grace for people who are both victims and victimizers. I mean, he's the tricker, he's the deceiver, and yet he himself is deceived, and yet God continues to love broken people, not only like Jacob, but like you and me.
Yeah. I think when you look at the story of Jacob, Isaac, Esau, and not just them, but really King David and on throughout, as we'll see in the story, it is a God who chooses to work through broken and messed up and highly dysfunctional families to carry his promise, his line down to the coming of the Messiah, and then in multiplicity of ways working grace in their lives. I think of great comfort to us today in our own families, the messes of our lives.
Yeah, and that's really mirrored with the kind of the second theme, that God has a plan for, or a plan through broken people. Grace for broken people, but a plan through broken people, that God's going to use this family to redeem and save the world. Literally. It's through that family line that Jesus will come. Jacob's story itself dominates 14 of the 50 chapters, almost 50%. Or is it, I can't do math again, apparently. A quarter nearly of the story of Genesis. He's the dominant figure and the father of the nation. And so it concludes the book of Genesis with the words of Joseph, and this is kind of a sneak preview for this coming weekend when we look at Joseph in chapter 7. Joseph concludes with the words to his brothers, "You meant this for evil, but God meant this for good, for the saving of many lives." And that's really the climax of the summary of the whole book of Genesis.
Yeah, and I would call it the climax of the summary of the whole Bible. right? Of God working through brokenness, working through evil, actually to bring good. So maybe we'll touch on that next week. Don't want to give it away, but even through the people who led Christ to the cross and their evil and brokenness, that greatest evil, you could argue, led to the greatest good.
Yeah.
But more on that next week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk some more about the cross. Your sermon spent a lot of time kind of unwrapping how this story, that is a true story, is really magnified on Mount Calvary. So tell us some more about that.
Yeah. Jacob as the younger brother, Esau as the older brother, the birthright, or in this case the blessing of the father to the son, which meant that, the kind of the legal sense of he would be the head of the family and get the wealth and get the status and all of that, but also this just very deeply emotional blessing and the father pouring his love into the son and pouring his affection into the son. We see in Christ, he is referred to in the Bible as the firstborn of creation. He is the older brother. He is the firstborn son of God, the son of God, etc. And as we see in the story of Jacob and Isaac and Esau, where Jacob literally has to dress up in his older brother's clothing in order to receive the blessing, so we see in us that Christ from eternity had a perfect loving relationship with the Father. The Father, you could say, doted on his Son. He poured his love, poured his admiration, poured his affection. I said very quickly, I'll say it now in the sermon, that I said in the sermon, when I go in and I see my daughter Amelia asleep, sometimes my love for her is almost scary, right? There's like an ache. I gotta leave the room. I just love her so much. And I think that's a drop of water in the ocean compared to the love that God had for the Son. So that what happens on the cross is that our older brother Christ, the Son of God, the firstborn, dresses up like us, dresses up like you and me with our sin, our mistakes, our brokenness, and lost the relationship with the Father, so that the Father then can take the royal robes of Christ, the true older brother, the true Son, and we're wrapped in his robes, that our Father dresses us up. And then we receive that blessing. We receive the love. And as just repeating something you said from a couple of weeks ago that I repeated in my sermon, not only does God love you, but there is a God out there who likes you, who actually delights in us. Like he just truly enjoys us.
Like he doesn't just love you because he has to.
Yeah.
He loves you because he likes you because he wants to.
He wants to. And of course he wanted to so much that he even gave of his own Son. Imagine giving of your child, giving that type of sacrifice for us to bring us back so we can receive the blessing of the Father, the blessing of the firstborn Son, the firstborn child.
What a beauty the gospel is. We see it here, in this story.
Yeah.
The story.
The story. Every page. If you look for it, every single word of the Bible, the Old Testament, even those dark, confusing parts, point us to Christ. Every single page, every story points to Christ. Pray for that as you study the Word. Pray, show me Christ in this. Pray for God and His Spirit's power to do that, and then so that you might experience the love of the Father.
Because we're not doing the stories.
No.
This year, we're doing the story.
The story.
Yeah.
Now, what's the story with the whole black shirt thing?
That's a great question. We're going to have to tackle that next week because we're out of time today. So, thanks for watching and have a great week.
That's a bold move. Pastor Peregoy. Bye.